Hello and welcome to the first session of the seminar Technē Beyond Monoculture, led by our instructor, Cécile Malaspina. This seminar offers multiple lines of inquiry addressing a commonplace whereby the crafts are frequently presented as uniquely nurturing and preserving local and even national cultural individuality, in contrast with the monoculture brought about by the standardization of modern global capitalist technologies. It questions the intuitive oppositions between crafts and technology on at least two fronts. On the one hand, they often promote the idea of crafts as preserving local and national identity, believes the complex international networks that have historically enabled not only the exchange of ideas, but the provision of specialized materials and tools. Recall, for instance, Levi-Strauss' remark that this is characteristic of humanity, that in its very essence, human and social progress can only exist insofar as different centers of human culture are in contact, that isolated societies are inert societies, and that only societies in contact with each other progress. On the other hand, it is of the utmost urgency today to question also the grounds on which techno-scientific rationality is commonly reduced or held accountable for what Herbert Marcuse called the performance principle of capitalism. One could also argue that this is a facile critique of techno-scientific rationality that concedes too critical a part of human inventiveness to the logic of capitalism. This service seminar will unite highly original thinkers from fields as diverse as philosophy, engineering, design, political theory, developmental psychology, and aesthetics to formulate the following problem in line with their own research. How can we rethink and ultimately emancipate the sprawling of contemporary Technē from capitalist monoculture and from the inanity of its performance principle, without relying on national particularities as an imagined panacea against alienation? Cécile Malaspina is the author of an epistemology of noise and principal translator of Gilbert Simondon's On the Mode of Existence of Technical Objects with the collaboration of John Rogoff. She is a directeur de programme at the Collège International de Philosophie, I'm sorry for my French, Paris, CIF, where she's also a member of the executive board. She's a visiting fellow at King's College London, where her program for CIF is hosted by the departments of Digital Humanities at the Department of French in association with the Center for Art and Philosophy. She's a member of the editorial boards of this book series at the Presses de Paris Nanterre and of its journal Philosophy Rue Descartes, where she has recently become co-responsible for the epistemology section, as well as being contributing editor for Angelaki, Journal of the Theoretical Humanities, commissioning editor for the independent publisher Copy Press, and guest editor at Nature, Humanities and Social Sciences Communications. Cécile Malaspina obtained her doctorate in epistemology, philosophy, and history of sciences and the technology from Paris 7 de Diderot, and her master's in contemporary French philosophy and critical theory from the Center for Research in Modern European Philosophy in the UK. Before turning to philosophy, she trained as an artist, art historian at Goldsmiths, and as a curator at RCA. Her main interest lies in the normativity of concepts, especially with regards to the aesthetic and ethical implications of conceptualizing contingency and uncertainty. Cécile, please take it away. We can hear you. The sound is...
Yeah, sorry about that little glitch. Started with a little glitch. Yeah, thank you very much, Mrs. Lab, for the introduction. And thanks everyone for joining so numerously. I'm really happy to meet you all, and I look forward to the introductions later at the end of the session. I might be clearing my throat and coughing a lot because I wasn't very well. I had COVID until a couple of days ago, so sorry if I suddenly disappear into a coughing fit. I try not to make it too disgusting. Anyway, it's really nice to meet you all. I'm really looking forward to understanding what backgrounds, research practices you come from, and what kind of crossroads brings you here to this seminar on Technē Beyond Monoculture. So I'm going to say a couple of words about the best thing about this seminar, which is the people that I managed to line up to intervene in the next few sessions, and I'm really excited about them. There's Jim Shrub on November the 5th, Anne Lefebvre on November the 12th, Betty Marenko on November 19th, Kirill Potapov on December the 3rd, and Jagmor Denizan on December the 10th, followed by Patricia Reed on December 17th, and finally a session by Daniela Voss together with Rafael, who's also a Pedroso, who's also a organizer here at the new center. And I'm also happy to say that Mrs. Lav is going to jump in the next seminar, which we're going to do on Simon, well, kind of on Simondon, which is a pendant to this one, because you'll see in a sec, I'm going to say a few words about the people who are going to speak in the next few sessions. And this seminar series is not about Simondon, but there's a little bit of a Simondon connection going on in the background. So Mr. Lev has been thrown in the deep end of a seminar on Simondon, but this is, I think, because he brings a really unique set of knowledge and experience of kind of technology beyond monoculture, if you like. So our opening session is today. I'm going to say a few things about what motivated this seminar and some of the fundamental ideas that I'm trying to weave together. I hope I'm not going to be too long, because I haven't really synthesized my notes and I've got too many pages here. The session on November the 5th with Jim Shrub. Jim Shrub, some of you might already know. He's really amazing. He's done a seminar for the Art and Curatorial program already. Jim works currently on Simondon's impact on contemporary media theory, and he's previously worked on Marx and Simondon's theory of technology. He's writing a Simondonian critique of survivalism. Anne Lefebvre, who's going to speak on November the 12th, founded the Center for Research and Design at the École Normale Supérieure de Paris-Saclay. And she's also a very renowned Simondon scholar, and she works on the ecology of images and the relation between techniques and life. So I'm really looking forward to her session as well. November the 19th is Betty Marenko. She is a reader in contextual studies and leader in product and industrial design at Central St. Martin's. So you can see already that we've tried to bring together people coming from different kind of theoretical and practical backgrounds, continuing with Kirill Potapov on December the 3rd. He's a researcher at University College London, working on developmental psychologist Lev Vygotsky. And personally, I'm really kind of looking forward to the whole area of comparative philosophical literature on Simondon and Vygotsky. I think there's going to be a very nice dialogue opening up there, but obviously this is not for this session. He also works on Ewald Ilyenkov, and his research is on personal information and self-tracking data in relation to social and emotional learning. On December the 10th, we have Jagmor Denizan. I don't know if some of you have already come across her in the interventions in the seminars that I did on aesthetics of noise for the Collège International de Philosophie. She is, in my eyes, someone very unique because she's a professor of electrical and electronics engineering at Boğaziçi University in Istanbul. She works on chaos control, modeling of nonlinear dynamic systems, and of biological systems. And she's also known for her work on biosemiotics and quite uniquely on Simondon. So I think it's a lot of Simondon readers. Unfortunately, it's impossible to be a polymath for most of us. So many of us have to kind of grind through the difficulty of his text and acquire as much as we can of technological knowledge, but it's very hard when you're not trained as an engineer. So she has this really quite unique approach that comes from standing at the confluence of the engineering and philosophical tradition when reading Simondon. So she's also just, it's just amazing. I'm really looking forward to her contribution, everybody's contribution. On December the 17th, we have Patricia Reed. I think most of you already know her work. She's an internationally renowned artist and theoretician, stroke philosopher, working on the entanglements between epistemology, modeling, and politics at planetary scales. She's also part of the Laboria Cubonics xenofeminist group. and currently acting as head of department at the Critical Inquiry Lab of the Design Academy in Eindhoven. So January 7th, we have Daniela Voss, who is a philosopher of technology at the University of Hildesheim, and she's very well known for her work on Deleuze and Guattari, and also for her work on Simondon and a kind of Marxist critique of Simondon. And she's going to be sharing her session with Rafael Pedroso, who you know as an organizer at the certificate program at the New Center. And he's also a researcher at the Pontifical Catholic University of Rio de Janeiro, working on the way that the present and future are experienced and imagined under capitalism. So now I'll jump right into the kind of motif of this idea of Technē beyond monoculture, which tries to tackle a commonplace that seems to imply that the crafts are presented as uniquely nurturing and preserving local and even national cultural identity. So that we have to kind of preserve our traditions and not let mass production, standardized mass production, and this kind of globalizing processes take over and create a kind of global monoculture. So there's an intuitive opposition between the crafts and industrialized technology. And this is one of the things that I would like to question in this seminar. So the crafts are defined as preserving local or national identity versus the complex international networks that have historically enabled not only the exchange of ideas, but the provision of specialized materials and tools. So what my session today is driving towards is that there are no crafts without access to this kind of necessarily international or global network of exchange of extractive practices and industrial technologies. So one of the examples I'm going to give is a Japanese craftsman who uses tin produced in the west of England. And one of my main references for making this argument is the anthropologist and ethnographer Claude Levi-Strauss, who remarks that it is characteristic of humanity and that it is even the very essence of human and social progress that it can only exist when different centers of human culture come into contact, and that isolated societies can remain inert for potentially 100,000 years. Actually, that's the example he gives. So that only societies in contact with each other progress. And in that respect, that insight is something that he makes him define ethnography and anthropology as revolutionary practices. In fact, he talks specifically about ethnography in the text that I will refer to. So, techno-scientific rationality. The question is, at the heart of this seminar is, do we necessarily have to reduce techno-scientific rationality to the performance principle of capitalism? Are they equivalent? In a lot of kind of technophobic critique of techno-capitalism, they seem to be equivalent, and there doesn't seem to be a kind of way of rendering intelligible how the confluence of engineering or technology and science, scientific rationality can be not co-opted by capitalism. And obviously the objective of the seminar is to see how, whether in the first place, and this is where I really look forward to your own perspectives and your own practices coming into this in the discussion, whether, and if yes, how can we emancipate contemporary Technē from capitalist monoculture and from the inanity of its performance principle? So I'm going to share my Zoom, and I'll just get a tissue quickly because I've got right. Share screen. Here we go. Okay, so just a sec, I'll be back. I just need to blow my nose. Okay, sorry about that. At least I don't have a coughing fit yet. So Technē beyond monoculture. The idea for the seminar came when I went to see a presentation last June by 2 Japanese craftsmen at the Japan House in London. So this was a presentation by shokunin, or master craftsmen, Shuji Nakagawa and Takahiro Yagi. Now, Nakagawa Shui is what they call in Japanese a kyoke, a wooden bucket maker. The 3rd generation successor to Nakagawa Mokoge. Sorry if I make a barbarism out of the pronunciation. Unfortunately, I don't speak Japanese. And kyoke is the name for these wooden buckets that are made using a curved blade out of Japanese cypress, which is cut and placed in a circular form, which is then bound by a bamboo or metal hoop without adhesive and without nails, and which is completely water and airtight, and it is used for holding just about anything from water to different types of food. So let me just go to the next. I'll show a little clip so that you get an idea of this.
オケっていうのはこうたくさんのパーツがこう寄せ集まって組まれてるわけなんですけども、あれってすごいその作る方からしたらすごい面倒くさいことをしてる感じになるんですよ。でもなぜそんな面倒くさいことをするかっていうと、桶のパーツ1枚が傷んだりした時にばらして、そのパーツ1枚だけを新しく組み替えてまた組み立て直すっていうことができるわけなんですね。要はそれをこう繰り返してると、いつの間にか全体が新品になっていく。要するに修理修繕しながら物を長く使っていくっていうことっていうのが、桶はその最初のなんていうかスタートラインというか存在が始まった時からそういう部分を内包してたっていうふうに思うんですよ。生まれた時に使う産湯から主食を入れるおひつで、味噌や醤油を作る樽で、日常の洗濯用の桶であったり、お風呂の浴槽であったりで、死んだ方入れるその棺桶ですよね。棺桶の桶も偉い人はこう棺に入れて埋められたけど、庶民は結構桶に入れてそのまま桶ごとお墓に埋めるっていうような習慣があったんで、そうするとまさにその生まれてから死ぬまで桶と関わってた日本人の生活っていうのはそれが数百年続いてたっていうふうに。
So the idea here is in a way very interesting because it's going to rejoin some of the arguments that Simondon makes about the evolution of technical objects, which is the fact that the object isn't subsumed by a kind of holism, that you have the whole object, and if it works, fine, and if it doesn't work, you have to chuck it away and have a new one. But that there's this idea of mobile components that you can take out and replace. That's one of the criteria actually for Simondon for the technical mentality. The other aspect here is that in the title of this video, which is the idea of a disappearing craft, so the idea that we have to preserve traditions and that they are significant for our cultural inheritance and the kind of cultural specificity of the different regions of cultural development. And the last thought on which he ends here, which is this idea from cradle to grave, which is that the crafts object is one with which we have a human relation. And you could contrast this with what Simondon says of technical objects that certainly wouldn't fall under the category of craft, where Simondon says there is something human in the technical object. There's something of human nature in the technical object. It's not just a kind of alienation or not purely artificial. In fact, for Simondon, it's not artificial at all, and that's one of the arguments that we will come to in a bit. So, can I move on to the next bit of the, how do you go to the next slide? Oh yeah, here. So I asked Shuji Nakagawa, and he kindly allowed me to have a look, to use images from his Facebook to make a point that I'm going to relate with, with the argument that Levi-Strauss makes. So when Shuji came to London, he says, and you can see that in his comment on the left, some trees I found in London last week, tree plant found in Chelsea herb garden filled with water in the grass and lots of weed growing. Another one in a furniture store in a window in Chelsea. And interestingly, you have a question on the right where someone asked them, oh, very interesting. Is there a difference in the manufacturing method? So between these casks and the ones that are made in Japan? And he answers, no, probably they're exactly the same. So the person who asked the question comes back and says, oh, so it's been transmitted to Japan from Osaka. Where is the origin of the technique of combining boards to make vessels? And Shuji answers, that's right, woodworking techniques are all over the world. It's said that they have originated from the Korean peninsula around 700 to 800 years ago in Japan's Okinawa. And since there's a Roman tree on display in a German museum, I'm wondering if it's around 2000 years ago. So the reason why I bring this up is not for ethnographic detail or accuracy. Obviously, these are facts that someone who really wants to know the history of these technologies needs to read up on. But what I thought was quite touching is that the idea of preserving a craft that is specific to the history and a kind of regional history of Japan, and that kind of resists and withstands its disappearance through the onslaught of mass-produced items and kind of global capitalist consumption, is something that is actually very similar and that probably has been transmitted through cultural exchange, potentially coming from Roman technology. I'm not trying to make a point here about the history of those casks. I don't know what they are. I just want to make a point about the fact that what is on the one hand preserved as a regional specificity, on the other hand, can exist only because there have been exchanges and, if you like, a kind of proto-dynamic of globalization. So, sorry, I might try and go back here. So Shuji is a third-generation successor to Nakagawa Mokoge. Kyoke wooden baskets are made. Okay, so I just said that already. And one of the innovations that Shuji introduces is that he now makes these casks for a kind of global market, and the influx of money and interest through this is actually something that is helping this technique from dying out, if you like, from lack of customers. And so he has, for example, collaborated with Dom Perignon to make champagne cooling baskets. The other person who made a presentation that evening was Takahiro Yagi, a sixth-generation master craftsman making Kaikadu brand Shatsutsu or tea caddies. The Shatsutsu is a cylinder-shaped airtight container of Japanese origin. It's used to protect foodstuffs such as green tea leaves from moisture and humidity. In Japan, many have been used for generations. So an individual item is passed down for generations. And that's, in a way, it's kind of a special attribute, both in function and beauty, because the object actually changes over time. And here you have objects that kind of represent the discoloration that is planned in, that is a planned stage of its kind of patina and aging. So they're unchanged handmade techniques that have been used for 150 years. And despite demand for mass consumption, the brand refused methods of industrial production, which appeared to reduce the quality. So each of these is an individual item that is completely unique. And that is we'll see in a second why this is important. So economic woes put this mode of production on the brink, and now it sees a revival, just as with the wooden caskets, because they're vitalized by global sales and by kind of a global interest in these sought after jewels of Japanese craft. So these items can be repaired when dented or distorted, and the technique is still practiced, and they're passed down generations as what they call living tools. And I think this is also something that rejoins some of the stakes that Simondon sees in a technological education, which is the idea that we should have a relationship with technological objects, although he doesn't talk about craft in particular, such that we can replace individual elements. I mean, that's not the case for these caddies in particular, but certainly that we should be able to repair them rather than just be consumers and ignorant of the object in itself and throw them away. So now, one of the interesting things that I mentioned earlier is that these items are made with tin plate imported from England. And I'm going to say a few more things about this in a second. But first, I just wanted to mention, so this is another example of how the patina of these objects changes over time. Another example here. Copper after 2 to 3 months, brass in 1 to 2 years, and tin after 3 to 5 years. So interestingly, there has been a cooperation or collaboration called Electronics Meets Crafts, when Panasonic decided to co-develop wireless speaker Kyotsutsu with Kaikado, with these Kaikado tea caddies. So Kyotsutsu is a handmade, as we said that already, is a handmade tea caddy. And if you place the speaker inside, it enables you to basically feel the vibrations of the sounds with the palm of your hand, taking advantage of the air tightness of the caddy. And the speakers turn on and off when you place the lid on it, and on when you open them. And so basically the makers of it compare it to something like the aroma of the leaves that wafts out when the music begins to play and the lid is opened. And I'm going to show you a little video of this. So this is the charger on the right, and on the left, I mean, this is so stunning, these objects. Okay. I'm sorry, we'll go back on this for a sec. So the rationale behind this collaboration was the idea that Panasonic would make home appliances and design them in such a way to combine what they call the spirit of Japanese traditional crafts, and give these objects a kind of dignified stature, a graciousness, an elegant mannerism, and this exquisite craftsmanship that makes each of these items completely unique. So this was actually one of the problems with placing standardized speakers inside the shape of these caddies, each of which is by a fraction of millimeters different. And this is the result of this Kyoto Kaden lab, through which Panasonic and the traditional industries, so, also other crafts people, are working together to co-create new home appliances, producing many prototypes that are highly acclaimed in Japan and across the world. And So the aim of this is re-establishing the emotional connection between appliances or technical objects and their users. So it's a kind of weird solution to something that Simondon, for example, desired very much, but I don't think he saw this coming, this kind of collaboration between crafts and high tech. So the aim is to inspire user affinity, objects that resonate with your memories, with the way that handcrafted goods did in the old days. So this is again this idea from cradle to grave. And the Japanese ethics, this is, sorry, they describe it as a Japanese aesthetics, a sensitivity and culture that could hold a key to the future of industrial designers collaborating with craftspeople on electronics and craft skills combined for a future that encompasses the idea of living well. So in some ways, as hopefully we're going to get to, I'm going to have enough time to see in a bit more detail, this is something that is very difficult to harmonize with how Simondon imagined the evolution of technical objects to pan out. But I think it's an example worth mentioning, and I think actually potentially quite a desirable development. I mean, obviously one of the drawbacks of these is that if they can't be mass produced, then they're not for everyone because they're probably very expensive. So next part of my presentation is about what has to exist into what kind of network is this super specialized, super regional, super localized tradition of crafts representative of Japanese culture and aesthetics, into what kind of network is it inserted without which it couldn't arise. And this is the question of tin mining in Britain. So tin mining itself has originated in prehistoric times, derived from smelt and bronze. So smelting is the extraction of metals from ore, an alloy that played a vital cultural role during the Bronze Age. Many southwest Britain, there are a lot in the southwest of Britain, which emerged during the Anglian stage and the Pleistocene glaciation between 478,000 years and 424,000 years ago, when England escaped glaciation and tin ore was readily available on the surface. So in the 19th century, advances in mining engineering enabled the exploitation of much deeper mines. So not just surface extraction, but creating mines which in themselves are already complex technological ensembles. In a few cases, these mines even extended both to multiple levels and working from below seabed. Crown's engine houses, which is the one that you see on this image, at Botterluck in the west of Cornwall, are now part of the UNESCO World Heritage. But an increasing supply of tin, initially from Malaysia, Bangka Island and Sumatra in the 1870s, and onwards also from Australia, along with a fall in demand for tin plate in the American market, caused the price of tin to fall, causing many of these Cornish mines to close. So I'm mentioning this just to show how these mines were almost from the start already inserted into something like a global network of extraction of natural resources, extraction, trade routes, and also political relations, because tin was also extremely important for tin and other metal extractions were fundamental for the development of weapons and arms, and therefore it's also interesting to notice that if the extraction of minerals and metals are fundamental to the development of capitalism, they are also an aspect of the markets that is highly regulated. So this is not a kind of free market situation, because the states regulate very tightly what happens to their metals. And since this is fundamental to the development of capitalism, I think this is actually a really important point. So in an article in 2018 by David Brennett, there's an interview with someone who still worked as a miner in the 1960s. And what is quite interesting here is that you have this contrast between something on the one hand that is absolutely fundamental to mass production and large-scale industrialization, And on the other hand, you have the description of a job of the miner going down to the mines that is actually quite similar to that of the craftsman. So you have someone interviewed called Peter Williams, who says it was a job that was in the blood. Peter Williams worked at South Crofty in the late 1960s as an underground miner, working at more than 2,000 feet depth. His grandfather was a tin miner, as was his great-grandfather, who also mined in South Africa. So you've got this kind of combination of something that is at once a kind of transgenerational practice that also requires a certain amount of skill, and that becomes part of someone's identity. And even by the late 1960s, tin mining was a very hands-on job, hard manual work. And Williams says it was nothing like coal mining, but it was done with machinery. We were working with solid granite. I find that kind of amazing if you just let that sink into your imagination for a moment, to try and be this deep under the sea level and extract ore from granite. So we had to drill 9 holes, 5 of which we'd fill with explosives. They had to be drilled strategically and exploded in a certain sequence. So the explosives were dynamite, and it is also Peter's job to handle, it was Peter's job to handle the detonators, seeing a fair share of accidents. So this is another image of the mine from below to kind of give a sense of what this kind of industry of mass production looks like when you look a little bit closer. So over the past 150 to 200 years, and this comes from the Dasgupta review on economics and biodiversity, the 2021 review, which is a really terrific document, actually, which I recommend everyone to familiarize yourselves with. So in this report, it is said that over the past 150 to 200 years, land use changes have transformed Earth's land surface. Approximately 60% has been altered primarily by agriculture, forestry, livestock grazing, mining, and quarrying, and a smaller amount by urban development and transportation corridors. So that's only 2 to 3% is the urban development. Jeannette Grelot is an author of the book, The Underground Wealth of Nations. Oops, sorry. This is the Economics of Biodiversity, the Dasgupta review of 2021. Jeannette Grelot is the author of a book called The Underground Wealth of Nations on the capitalist origins of silver mining in the Middle Ages. And she argues that the search for the origin of capitalism often ignores or deliberately ignores mining and prefers to focus on England's Industrial Revolution. And she blames for this both political economy, traditional political economy, but even Marx, who separates mining and capitalism and relegating mining to a kind of proto-capitalist surplus extraction under the hands of lords, which, contrary to the advanced agriculture, seemed stuck in a feudal mode of production and constrained by cycles of nature. But Grelot argues that medieval mining, unlike other productive industry, and she, in quotes, she says, she talks about piercing mountains with tunnels and sinking shafts at depth that could reach 3,000 feet, and timbering mine walls and galleries, transporting ores and inputs, renting beasts of burden, paying land surveyors, foremen and expert miners, and building water wheels and ore smelting factories. So all this complex ensemble of knowledge and techniques that had to come together and funding for this means that mining also required costly financing or capital, notably for shaft flooding, which came not from the lords, but from a new economic agent of the medieval world, which is the shareholding mining corporation. Holding 16 partii or shares in the case of Alpine companies and up to 32 or 30 shares in Sardinia, medieval mining corporations were advanced private businesses, organized hierarchically, Medieval mining corporations had secretaries, accountants, chief engineers, experts in mine geometry, cashiers, financial officers. So this is a really complex operation, which I suppose few people would suspect in the Dark Ages. And wherever it flourished, it established rules for leasing, selling, mortgaging, donating, and inheriting mining shares at the expense of the lords. More importantly, corporations were dominated by powerful groups of private citizens who paid the costs and enjoyed profits from the exploitation of the underground wealth of the nations. So this is, I'm kind of quoting from her summary of her own book. An unprecedented economic change was triggered by the progress of the medieval mining corporation. The underground wealth of nations was an economic reality in the making, forging capitalist relations long before the rise of modern capitalism. Exploitation of mines deepened not upon the regularity of natural phenomena, as political economy thinkers argued, but on the mining corporations, which hastened the dissolution of feudal lords, of the power of feudal lords by driving capitalist change in mining lands. This is a publication from Yale. So considering the critical importance of mining for war and military purposes, mining is then also a fundamental aspect of the history of war, the history of slavery, but also in terms of the miners' strike, which have had a fundamental impact on development, on political history. But also wood craftsmanship, which we mentioned with the first example, likewise is entangled with what has been proposed but not yet accepted as a geological age, the Anthropocene, from the deforestations that opened up civilizations of agriculture to the building of Rome, and finally the historical yokes forbidding the logging of wood, for example, the Normans oppressing the Anglo-Saxons by forbidding them to log the woods so that they could kind of keep their hunting grounds, and naturally also in Marx's famous piece on the theft of wood. All these bring into question also the notion of the commons. So now I'm going to go to Claude Levi-Strauss. So what I've tried to do in the first part of this presentation is just to show to what extent the endearing notion of the crafts as something that has to be protected and preserved as and often has very conservative impulse, something that preserves national identity and regional identities, and that has to be unchanged through time and takes pride in handcrafted techniques that do not change over 150 years and so forth. And to see both that going forward, this survives only because of global markets and because of this opening up of collaborations with high tech, but also going backwards, its very possibility of existence relies already on a kind of global network of extractive large-scale industrial technologies. So moving away slightly now and going a little bit deeper, I suppose, into this idea of what Simondon would call the evolution of technical objects, but what you could also ask is what is a fundamental aspect of progress, social and political progress. I'm going to look now at Claude Lévi-Strauss's book, De Montaigne à Montaigne. To my knowledge, it's not translated, unfortunately. Published in 2016 by the Édition Ehess. This is a book that combines two unpublished lectures that were given more than half a century apart. The first is the first speech ever given by Lévi-Strauss in 1937, and the second was given in April 1992, the year of the 400th anniversary of Montaigne's death. Mr. Slow, how am I doing for time? It's no longer there. What's the time? I'll check myself. I can't see because I'm. Can someone tell me what the time is?
We have enough time. Now it's 49 minutes since the beginning.
Okay, so I'll try and not take too
We
long.
have an hour and 40 minutes.
Okay, yeah,
So-
good. I won't make it too long. If you can tell me maybe halfway through, we'll have a little break, 10-minute break, and then we can come back to it, if that's okay.
Okay, if we are making a break, I will notify you. When we
Yeah,
should.
yeah, please do. I think it's a good thing to be able to go and grab something to drink. Or Fernando, did you want to say something? You had your hand up? No.
Sorry. I was confused.
Okay, no problem. So, une science révolutionnaire, a revolutionary science. That's the argument of the first of the two conferences, which Levi-Strauss gives to CGT members. So that's a confederation, the General Confederation of Work, which is the national trade union in France. And so it's a kind of talk about ethnography to his socialist comrades. And he asks, why is anthropology revolutionary? Because the knowledge of others, so the kind of encountering of people, cultures, or societies that have evolved differently or separately from us, the knowledge of others goes hand in hand, or is a prerequisite for the critique of one's own society. So he gives the example of the Greek skeptics, which only emerged at the time of Alexander the Great's encounter of Indians. He gives the example of Montaigne's new critique at the time of the discovery of the Americas in the 16th century. And the Enlightenment, and Rousseau and Voltaire's Candide. And he also gives the example of 1917 and the rise of ethnography in the Soviet Union. So what he argues for a kind of indelible link between ethnography and revolution, forward dash, what is it called? Forward dash critique. So for him, critique is a kind of synonymous with revolution. But at the same time, at the heart of his presentation is a paradoxical attitude that we found also in relation to this idea of preservation of the crafts. A paradoxical attitude that is, on the one hand, the desire to preserve and protect and spare the traditional cultures that he encounters, spare them the contact with modernity and the potential obliteration of their specificity. And at the same time, obviously, this progressive thrust of ethnography as something revolutionary. So it pulls into two different directions, conservative and progressive at the same time, backwards and forwards in time as well. So l'esprit révolutionnaire, je veux dire l'esprit critique. That's his kind of equation of critique and revolutionary spirit. And Levi-Strauss observes, and remember this is 1937, that out of the 125,000 years of human cultural development, and he speaks of the industrie chézelienne, and I don't know if someone here speaks French because I couldn't find a translation for this, and I looked it up, but now I don't know if I put this here. So out of the last 125,000 years, for 100,000 years at least, humanity repeated identical types of tools, not only identical across time for 100,000 years, but across space, with a highly comparable finds from what is now France to Africa and Russia. So the discovery of sharp edges as tools likewise continued unchanged until metal was discovered, remaining relatively static in terms of technological innovations for another 3,000 to 4,000 years, until the power of vapor was discovered, followed by the power of electricity. So he says in the last 300 years, mankind made more formidable technological leaps than for the previous 100,000 years. So he's a really beautiful speaker and orator, and even when he writes, I mean, these were obviously written for a larger audience, but there's a very kind of cunning structure to it, because while he says something that is apparently very obvious, he's also dismantling a myth that I think is still very prevalent today when we talk about the evolution of mankind or the evolution of technology in terms of these anthropological stages, because what he says is that progress is precisely not regular, like the development of a child or like the development of a seed into a mature tree. It's more like an 80-year-old who is an infant until he's 70, who then masters primary school from 70 to 75, and secondary school in the last 5 years, and probably in the last 5 minutes kind of had a kind of technological epiphany and a kind of exponential growth in technological innovations. So this is nothing like a continuous evolution. He says, I quote him, "It is as if humanity was at first something inert, as if it needed exceptional stimuli to move and change its state. So why did mankind need better tools after 100,000 years of quasi-inertia of technological development?" The other point that he makes is that there are no regular geographical distributions of technological development or of the kind of evolution of social institutions. So they don't follow one from the other like a kind of natural evolution or like a spontaneous development. But there are only delimited zones of relative diffusion of technologies, of family structures, of beliefs. But these zones border on other zones that show no trace of continuity whatsoever. So that don't have the same techniques, don't have the same beliefs, don't have the same family structures and so forth. Now, Montaigne stresses that the ethnographer, at least at the time of his writing, and remember this is in 1937, can use what he calls a circular model. So this doesn't represent the geographical shape of these zones, but more kind of logic of diffusion of innovation. With a central position that is rich and complex, giving rise to a certain amount of developments, for example, in pottery, certain types of decoration. And around this center, a marginal position that is poorer in innovation, or on the outer spheres, if you like, where there are only traces of this development. So the idea is that the spheres of influence radiate from a center of innovations. For example, ceramics, having 5 colors in some areas, are found in a central zone, but only 4 colors in zone B, which would be the kind of periphery of that, and only 3 colors in zone C. And then there's another area where there's no ceramics at all. So the hypothesis, which has been reinforced at the time by archaeological excavations, is that the oldest innovation, for instance, the use of a particular pattern or color, has traveled the furthest, all the way to zone C, while the most recent may still be confined to the center, not having had the time to extend the sphere of influence. In other words, the idea of the distinct ages of humanity or of its cultural development from the Stone Age to the second and third revolution wrongly suggest an analogy with the spontaneous evolution of a child or of a seed into a mature tree. These stages of progress, insofar as they are always and necessarily borrowed from neighboring cultures, mean that you can get something like a human phenomena or types of social organization that have a massive area or zone of extension next to areas that, for lack of contact, are completely devoid of it. So he also kind of makes a small excursion and says that the idea of primitive peoples is a notion that actually comes down to a biblical narrative rather than the idea. Sorry, just a sec, more interruption. So this idea of the primitive then makes sense only if you wrongly apply a developmental teleology. In reality, these different histories have simply followed a different path through different types of associations whose dynamic of diffusion of innovation or of absorption of innovation can be traced through ethnographic techniques that render these dynamics intelligible, these flows, inflows and outflows of innovation, if you like. So hence, ethnography is revolutionary for Levi-Strauss because it contributes to this critique in the self-understanding of social institutions by way of the diversity of creeds, habits, traditions, and through its fundamental lesson, which is this, that it is only through contact and by borrowing ideas that we overcome the inertia of humanity. And as a consequence, social progress can only be maintained and developed in proportion to these contacts. So an isolated society, like he gives the example of the Mexican civilizations that collapsed, although being extremely complex at the time of encountering the what he calls a handful of Westerners, which I think is probably a bit of a euphemism. And it collapsed, he says, because they were isolated and confronted with representatives of a society that had been in extensive contact with other societies. So the revolutionary insight of ethnography is that societies don't move and they don't progress and they don't change unless isolated and independent creations are exchanged between them. And that a society in isolation has no natural inclination to progress without a multitude of small shocks derived from contacts with other nations. So now on to Simondon and the evolution of technological objects in relation to this question of progress and standardization. Now Simondon is born in 27, he died in 1989. He studied with the French epistemologist Georges Canguilhem and Hippolyte, who was famous for having translated Hegel into French, and also Merleau-Ponty at the École Normale Supérieure. Between 1950 and 63, he taught philosophy, psychology, science, and law, and literature in Tours and Poitiers. And he then moved to the Sorbonne in Paris, where he founded a lab in general in technical psychology, where he stayed until 1983. And he was the organizer of the famous 1962 Royaumont Colloquium on Information, where he also pioneered the engagement with information theory in France. And his major works include Du mode d'existence des objets techniques, which I was very happy to translate into English as the mode of existence of technological objects with John Rogoff, and L'individu et sa genèse physico-biologique, and which is one part of his primary doctoral thesis, which has been published as and recently translated as Individuation in Light of the Notions of Form and Information. So just a little bit of background for those of you who are not too familiar with him. So next, I want to take up a few of his ideas from a text called Human Progress, a critical study, which has been translated by Sean Cubitt. Do you see my the kind of strip with the participants in the shared screen or not? Does it kind of block the text or not? No, never mind. I think it's okay. If you're not complaining, it must be okay. Sorry for the coughing. So the question is, now that we have a vision of the world as finite, we have an image, shot from space, and we see the world no longer as something infinite, but as something that can be accounted for through scientific modeling, and that we can visualize as a kind of finite object of perception. Where would this stimulus come from? Once globalization has brought about all the possible interactions, and so this is not Simondon's argument, this is a kind of question I throw out there for you to engage and perhaps respond to at the end of the seminar. The question is this: now that we have a global vision of the Earth, one of the Earth as a kind of finite and limited object of knowledge, but also finite and limited resources, where would this stimulus come from once globalization has brought about all the possible interactions between people that up until a certain moment had a distinct and different path of development? Will it bring about a kind of entropic diffusion or exhaustion of innovation? And will it necessarily result in this kind of bland monoculture that will be in this sense of it would be bound to collapse in the sense of this lecture given by Claude Levi-Strauss. And what about the ambivalence, conservative versus revolutionary, of wanting to preserve and protect ways of life from a capitalist globalized monoculture versus empowering social complexity and resilience through contact and exchange of ideas? So can you have both at the same time? Probably yes. Is innovation the only dynamic in the direction of flow of exchange of ideas? So this flow of influence from a kind of center of innovation to its peripheries that Claude Levi-Strauss was describing in what sounded very optimistic at the time, I think would be much more problematic now. My own observation as a Western German whose father came from the east of Germany is that the unification of West and Eastern Germany is an example where economic power dictated the direction of flow and the number of innovations. Notably gender parity. So a number of we'll just start again. So the direction of this flow of innovation was dictated by money, and which meant that basically Western German economic and socioeconomic and political models kind of flooded Eastern Germany without actually a form of exchange or contact or feedback. In terms of other innovations, notably the fact that gender parity was pretty much acquired in Eastern Germany and was perceived as extremely retrograde in the West by many Eastern Germans, or, for example, the critical ability to see through consumerism, which is something that when you speak with people who grew up in Eastern Germany is very prevalent, and that was completely obfuscated in the West. So it seems like we're not talking about an exchange in the case of all contacts necessarily. I mean, this is also what we see with this kind of expansion of capitalism, but with a kind of power dynamic of almost forced transmission of innovation. That's another thing to discuss perhaps at the end of the seminar, which I would like to have your thoughts on. So now to Simondon, Human Progress, a Critical Study, this famous and really quirky text, which I hope some of you had a chance to read. Like a lot of his thinking, which confounded many of his contemporaries, because this idea of really getting your teeth into technology, into the nitty-gritty, the details of technology, is something that really befuddled a lot of philosophers. And it's one of the reasons why you could say that he was exiled into a psychology department and he couldn't have a career despite his stature, and he was very influential and important at the time, but he couldn't make a career as a professor of philosophy in the French universities. And that's this kind of bringing together of two areas of knowledge that had evolved completely independently from each other, in France, at least to a certain extent.
Cécile, I'm sorry to interrupt. Perhaps we should make a break for now.
Yeah. I think that's a good idea. Okay, shall we have like, I don't know, 5-10 minutes? Because we have 2.5. Is it long?
5 to 7 minutes, I suppose. Yes.
What did you say?
5-7 minutes, perhaps. And
what is it now?
Okay.
Good. I'm sorry, I don't have a watch and I can't get out of the stop share. It's 8 past, yes. So like 1/4 past. Yeah, will we be back at 1/4 past?
Yes, great.
Cool. See you in a sec.
Okay.
Okay, we're back.
Yes, we may continue, I suppose.
So I'll pop back on the screen share. So human progress. You can hear me, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay, human progress, a critical study. So like Claude Levi-Strauss, Simondon has his own contribution to make to the critique of the notion of progress, which is not a kind of progressive sophistication, but something that he describes as a succession of phases or stages, each of which tend towards a kind of internal coherence and saturation of its schema. So each of these phases in the system tending towards saturation. He gives the example of the three phases, if you like: classical antiquity, the Middle Ages, and modernity. And he describes these as a progression based on needs. So starting from the most basic need, language to communicate. If you like, the next phase is religion as the need to be at one with the world. And the phase that we would be in now, which is that of technology, would be that of sustaining life. And he says that these phase transitions, if you like, become more and more universal. So how is that? Why is that? How do you determine a law of development between these different phases? And one of the innovations of Simondon's thought about technology in particular is that you cannot understand the evolution of technical objects if you look at the objects, if you simply look at the objects themselves. There's something else that is going on that isn't a simple kind of ontology of objects gradually changing and becoming better. So what he means by these phases is that you start with the classical times, the classical antiquity, which is a kind of a first phase of the perfection of language. And then the Middle Ages, which is a kind of perfection of the moral blueprint or of a system of values in religion. And then modernity, which starts this kind of technological development. To be completely honest with you, it's something that I have my own problems with. I'm not sure these phases make sense. I mean, the same, what I tried to highlight with the history of tin mining, for example, is that this isn't something that started only with modernity. Sure, the industrial process of tin mining did, but on the other hand, all of the transformation of human cultures that we know are linked to those technological advances too. So I don't know, I never really got these big phases. Also in the mode of existence of technical objects, he has a really kind of cool, to me it sounds more like a kind of mythological ethnography, or the kind of schematization of how all these phase shifts came about and brought us to modernity and technological development. And I don't know, we can, with those of you who are into Simondon, we can discuss this later, but let it sit here for a second, because one of the things that I do think is interesting is that there are areas of specialization that tend towards a kind of inner concretization, by what he means an increasing resonance, that they are so specified that they become fully resonant and few things are left to chance. And he says this progress, for example, of language or of religion or of technology is limited in time. And therefore, and this is a kind of surprising hypothesis, therefore, technical progress also potentially would be limited in time, according to what he kind of gives this example of a sigmoid curve. This is the slide that I used here, which has this characteristic S shape. and that applies to many natural processes and in complex systems, like, for example, learning curves that exhibit this progression from small beginnings and then accelerate and then kind of taper off and approach a climax over time where they saturate and then stabilize. So he doesn't suggest that human progress is simply moving from one phase to the next. And not merely, this is not merely about technological process, the progress, which is simply the phase that we're in now. So all of progress isn't simply leading up to technological progress, but this is simply a phase that we're in at the moment. And these different phases also overlap and synergize together. And when they overlap and synergize, this is when they acquire greater universality. I'm going to explain this in a second. He gives the example of the Reformation. So the Reformation, in a way, takes advantage of the Renaissance, kind of looking back onto antiquity and classical culture, introducing the power of language and of linguistic processes into the religious domain and saturating it. The previous ancient phase, likewise, or the kind of classical antiquity, likewise saturated when it integrated religious and ethical forces that were arising. So he talks about the expansion of ethical religious philosophies like Stoicism and Gnosticism. And so he says when these phases start to have a common denominator, they start to universalize. So there's this kind of cross-phase resonance happening that is characteristic of what he calls universality. There's an overlapping in pursuit of universality. So progress then is not a succession, but an integration, the universalization of these different phases. So what they have in common, these different phases, is not the concrete content, or what is important about it, for example, the theater in classical culture or the cathedral in the Middle Ages or technical objects, but what they have in common is actually human endeavor as an engine of what he calls concretization. And I'll come to that when we talk about the technical mentality. So the concretization is, he says that the earliest schemas, and taking the example of the evolution of technical objects, are abstract in the sense that you knock together a few elements that do a certain job. And over a period of refinement, these elements no longer simply coexist as kind of separate, according to a separate logic or schema, but they integrate further and further. They become plurifunctional and synergetic. Certain elements start to take on several different functionalities. And by doing this, they also overcome some of the negative side effects of what was previously the role of or function of each of the elements or organs that weren't thought as synergetically, but that were thought kind of in isolation for what each thing does. Don't know if I explained that very well, but we'll get back to this in a second. So concretization, this is this idea going from something that is abstract, in the sense not yet fully integrated, not yet fully synergetic and resonant, but kind of sitting next to each other, each thing functioning for its own, to something that becomes more concrete in the sense that it is more, that it's the functionality of each element is more integrated and synergetic. So progress is not a succession, but likewise an integration. So rather than having a kind of abstractly sitting next to each other, these different phases of development, like you had, for example, in the beginning, this is not the example he gives, but in the beginning of the Middle Ages, you had a certain reading of Aristotle that started to produce a clash between theology and philosophy. And so one of the problems was these sitting abstractly one next to the other, how do you make them resonant one with the other in kind of ethics, for example? So progress is this self-limiting of the cycles, which are then integrated in systems, which man forms with these cycles in the direction of greater resonance. So what they all have in common, what's important about what they have in common is not the types of objects that they produce, but this element of continuity, which is human endeavor. And he asks, and this is really an interesting kind of typical moment of Simondon, he says, what about automatism and hypertrophy of automatism? So the over-reliance on automatism as an end of the evolution that concludes the development of one cycle. And he's not actually talking about technology, but he's talking about the phase of classical antiquity, this saturation of the development of language with sophisticated theories of grammar and formal logic, which kind of top off the development of language in classicism. So what about the role of automatism? And those of you who know the mode of existence of technical objects will know that one of his critiques of a kind of technocratic attitude to technology, one that doesn't understand the technicity at the heart of technological development, is this overemphasis or celebration of automatisms, which is one of the least interesting aspects for Simondon in relation to technological development. So one other interesting aspect that he brings up is the fear of decline, which obviously the beginning of the 20th century was, we have it also now at the beginning of the 21st century. The fear of decline is, for example, when the ancients see the decline in an abandonment of the perfection of language in favor of religion. So religion first erupts in this classical antiquity as something that is seen as vulgar and destructive, as a form of barbarism, as a passage from, and now today he says the passage from religion, of, if you like, from a values-based system to one that is based on technology, is likewise experienced as something vulgar. And I think you could compare this, for example, to a lot of kind of ecological nostalgia for a golden age, or kind of proto-religious new age vibes that would be a kind of retro-peddling and letting go of all this technological development. But universality is this descent into the primitive. So for Simondon, the technological development is in a way the most primitive of the three in terms of our needs. And it starts with language becoming congruent with a polity, with a society, religion becoming congruent with diverse ethnicities in one civilization, and technology, he says, is the most universalizable because it's the most primitive, it has the most primitive resonance with the conditions of life. So he says also in different places that it's the mediation between man and nature. And interesting is his hypothesis that because of this, there is a chance that the things that technology brings forth will be less alienating and less decentering than previous domains. So less alienating than the eruption of religion was for classical antiquity. And I don't know, interesting to pursue this hypothesis, because I would say that a lot of our theories of alienation center around the idea of kind of techno-scientific capitalism. So what went wrong? This would be the question. And then he develops a quite weird hypothesis that I think is worth spelling out, that is very counterintuitive, and at the same time, I think contributes to some of the more audacious thinking about technology today. He says, and can't remember when this text was written, but it might seem naive when you look back to this now. He says, only when humans become homogeneous with technical objects, only when we become like the technical object or at one with the technical object, both as the operator of technical objects, but also as the object of the technical operation. So this is, I mean, really creepy to think of this in the time of algorithmic governmentality. So only when humans become homogeneous with technical objects, both as operator and as object of the operation, not operator and consumer after the object is produced, but really as that on which the technicity of the object acts. And he says, I quote, "Man is very rarely, as man, that on which the technological operation is carried out, except in surgery, war, or ethnic and political struggles, but not as instigating, as constructing men." You can almost kind of think of a kind of Haraway or xenofeminist direction that this argument could go. But what he means by this is a resonance between a techniques of action on things and a technique of action on people. So why should they resonate? And it's a really weird thought, but it's going to make sense, more sense, I hope, at the end, and which doesn't take away the fact that it's also really problematical and needs to be critiqued. So not merely replacing language and religion in political struggle and psychoanalysis, for example, technology has potentially a non-sigmoid development, so that it doesn't necessarily have to top off and saturate and stop like this. If replacing language and religion with a metrology of humans and an energetics of humans in unity with techniques is devoted to a kind of universalizing technique towards people and towards things. So this could sound like the absolute and utter dystopia, but there's a particular way in which this can be also a little bit less noxious, and I hope I make this clear in a little moment. So I'll just say this again because I wrote this down a bit scrambled and I'm not sure I said it very well. So he's talking about the resonance between techniques of action on things and the techniques of action on people. Kind of a homogenization between the two, so that they are resonant one with the other. Not merely replacing language and religion in political struggle and psychoanalysis. Technology then could be, if you arrive at applying a techniques to an energetics, where did I say this? Sorry, I'm saying this all wrong. So technology has potentially this non-sigmoid development, so not topping off, not saturating and then ending, if replacing language and religion with a metrology of humans, and an energetics of humans in unity with techniques devoted to humans, universalizing technique towards people and towards things. I give you a little sneak preview of what I think he means here, which is closing, actually it's a bit counterintuitive, but it's closing the gap between what we perceive to be artificial about technology and nature, closing the gap between technology and nature. I think this is what he means. We can discuss this later. For now, I have to say it sounds really creepy. So the discrepancy between the science of things and the science of humans is one of the causes of a kind of lingering abstraction in this relation. And he says, I quote, "True technical progress might be considered as implying human progress if it has a network structure whose mesh is human reality." So true technological process or true technical progress could be considered as implying a human progress only, he doesn't say only, but if it has a network structure whose mesh is human reality. A kind of intermeshing, reticular network relation of humanity and technical objects. So progress in this sense must then be self-regulating, a form of resonance between two domains. Simondon speaks of a kind of crisis of progress when he talks about these different phases that both succeed each other in terms of their development and overlap. He talks about crises of progress in each domain. But real progress is what is passed on between successive domains of crisis and saturation to the next, and it can only be passed on via philosophy or via reflexive or self-reflexive thought. So it's philosophy that becomes the common denominator between these phases and the kind of vehicle for the transmission of what can be the factor of resonance between them. The condition of possibility of resonance between them, between the open system that mankind is and the closed system and their concrete artifacts of each of these phases that tend towards saturation. Of resonance between successive phases. And he says there's a preoccupation with totality, a kind of counteracting of the destabilizing, alienating forces of each phase. So you counteract the kind of the feeling of barbarism through philosophy by bridging or rendering their overlaps intelligible and creating resonance between the phases, meaning making them universal. He says only philosophical thought is common to progress in language, progress in religion, and progress in technology. The technological phase also bears great risks of alienation, of failing to become integral, of failing to become an integral part of human progress by forming a system with man. The risk of alienation is not that we suddenly have technological objects in our lives, but that we're not sufficiently integrated, not sufficiently resonant with them. And he said earlier, homogeneous with the technical reality. Okay. So the question of the limit to technological progress is the question of the limit of thought, or the question of the limit of philosophy. So in philosophy lies this evolutionary potential in the human species. And now, just to close this before we go on to Simondon's text on technical mentality, just want to, this is a really complex text. I don't know how many of you had a chance to actually read it. I hope I didn't mangle it up too much in trying to get the main points out. But if you compare this to Levi-Strauss's idea, for Levi-Strauss, it was the contact between peoples that was the repository of evolutionary potential in human species. So there was, if you have a group that is isolated from the others, nothing at all will happen, potentially for 100,000 years. And here you have a kind of more dynamical understanding, which at the same time also talks about systems that tend towards a saturation, at which I suppose you could combine Levi-Strauss's attitude and Simondon's and say, okay, if the internal necessity to the development of our understanding of language reaches a point of saturation in grammar and formal logic, where it can't really go any further, I suppose there's a point at which, unless people are in contact with each other, the other phases don't come about necessarily. That would be a merger, if you like, of Simondon and Levi-Strauss. But with the text on Simondon technical mentality, we can try and elucidate this, I think, really creepy, weird sounding idea. Let's try and find it again here of the human not being the operator only, but also being the kind of that on which the technical object acts. Not as instigating, but as constructing man. A resonance between techniques of action on things and techniques of action on people. So it sounds like a kind of perfect description of a dystopia of algorithmic governmentality. But this closing of the gap between technical reality and human reality, I think I don't know if it can be resolved, but there's some aspects which become a little bit less alienating when you read this text, the technical mentality. And I'll just leave the screen share for a sec to see what time it is. How much time do we still have?
We have about an hour.
Oh, yeah, good.
55 minutes.
Okay, good. An hour. Okay, fine. So I'll try and wrap this up in 20 minutes. Can you tell me in 20 minutes?
In 20 minutes, okay.
Yeah, because then we still have 40 minutes to talk also about the essays and other things and have a discussion.
And introduction as well.
Yeah, most importantly. So in the Simondon on technical mentality is a text that has been translated as chapter 1 in the book called, can you see it here? It published by Edinburgh, what was it called again? Being in Technology. The text was translated by Arne de Beuven, and the book was published by Edinburgh University Press in 2013. So in this text, Simondon starts by talking about the role of cognitive schemas in the technical mentality. And he starts with Descartes, who uses the paradigmatic method of analogy. There's also a text in the back of the book, the big primary thesis that was translated on the mode of individuation in light of information and individuation in the light of the notions of, I can't remember now, it's called potential and information. I should really know, but anyway, so he starts with this idea of Descartes using a paradigmatic method of analogy. So that's very important for him. It's something that he also expands on in a text at the end of his main thesis, so the individuation book. I think it's the text on alagmatics. It's really worth reading. It's very dense, but it's kind of interesting. And it's one of the reasons why this attitude has emerged, where we consider living beings as machines. If they were not machines ontologically, then they would have to be so as, at least analogically, in order to be objects of science. So compared to the statement of technology and humans as operator and object, you have here already with Descartes the idea that you need to have a cognitive schema that tends away from abstraction towards the concretization of your schemas of thought concerning the human and technological schemas. For there to be a kind of universal validity of the claims that you make. So another aspect of the technical mentality is the anticipation of thresholds. So the fact that when you invent a technological schema, you take into consideration not only elements and structures and kind of functional relations between them, but you also take into consideration thresholds in the dynamics of the system in which you insert your invention. So in the example of the Gambale turbine, it's an invention that for which you have to anticipate that it will work before you can build it. I don't know, I'm not really feeling fresh enough now to go into the details of this and try to explain it, but no, let's just I could just perhaps describe it. The Gambale group, so this turbine is held entirely in the forced conduct of a dam. An idea that originally seemed completely absurd, because previously the problem was for the generator not to overheat. And in this case, you have a really small turbine that's encased and you wouldn't know where the heat would escape to, but the alternator is so small that it seems that the armature should be destroyed by the Joule effect, so by the heat that it generates. But it is precisely this small dimension that allows for the alternator to be lodged completely, so to fit within the canal on the turbine axis itself, so to be integrated in it. This ensures a cooling that has a considerably greater effect than that of an alternator placed in the air. This disposition is made possible by putting the alternator in a casing filled with oil, which both, so there's this, again, the synergy in plurifunctional use, it heightens the isolation and it improves the thermal exchanges, all the while ensuring the lubrication of the different levels and preventing water from coming in. So the oil here has this kind of, is very representative of a concretization of a technical object, where it starts to fulfill several functions at once and also works synergetically in such a way as to counterbalance the potential negative side effects or malfunctionings. So here, the multifunctional character of the oil, of the casing, is the very schema of concretization that makes the invention exist as a regime of functioning. So from the technical mentality, he talks about Descartes' cognitive schema. He also gives the example of the cybernetic schema of self-regulation, to the movement of thought capable of larger schemas based on a postulate. And this is interesting because it comes back to one of the things that, what's his name again? Nakagawa Shui said about his wooden baskets. So this is the idea of detachable units. So it's against the holism of the object, the idea that you can take elements out and replace them and change them. And of anticipation of effects requiring thresholds that activate synergetic functions. So it's only once you place the whole turbine in the water with all the pressure that its own functioning kind of counteracts its malfunctioning. So how do you go from these cognitive schemas to what he calls affective modalities? And this is in a way, this is fundamental for this conversation between the crafts and standardized industrial technological development. He says there's an antagonism between the artisanal and the industrial modes, an antagonism that is paired to the impossibility of separating the two aspects. So that's one of the things I tried to show with the recourse to tin plates produced by extractive technologies in England, and the fact that you can't have this craft of making these beautiful tea leaf containers without already relying on a global network of extractive industries. So you can't separate these two perfectly, but still there is an antagonism between them, between the industrial and between the crafts. In the case of the craftsman, all conditions depend on the human being as both the source of the energy is the same as that of information. So the source of the energy is the human body, and the source of information is also the knowledge that the craftsman has integrated, sometimes through refined knowledge passed down through generations. And the two sources are then both in the human operator. So the energy here is like the availability of the gesture and the exercise of muscular force. And information simultaneously is in the human operator as something that is learned, drawn from the individual past and enriched by education, and as the actual exercise, also the learning through exercise of sensorial equipment that controls and regulates the application of learned gestures to the concrete materiality of the material. I'm really sorry about the coffee. So the manipulation in the case of craft is carried out according to continuous schemas on realities that are of the same scale as the operator. So we had this beautiful video of the wood workshop where everything is roughly a kind of commensurate scale between the human and the tools and the materials that he uses in the workshop. So the distance between the act of working and the conditions of use of the product is small. And there's a possible recurrence between the two. The speed with which the object wears off, the types of deformation of the product during use are known to the craftsman, who not only constructs but also repairs. So this is also something I try to link with the examples given in the beginning. The relation between the human being and nature in this case is immediate. There's no distance between the craft and nature because it lies in the choice of the materials and of the work that is done to them. And there was some beautiful images also on the Facebook page of Shuji, which is where he hugs a tree, and there's this appreciation for the materials that you use, to which there's a kind of immediate relation. So the distance between the act of working and the conditions of use are short. The shoemaker, for instance, has directly taken the measurements. A saddler knows for which horse he's creating a harness or saddle, and there's a recurrence that is possible. The wearing off of the object, deformation of the products, and repairs, which are all kind of integral to the process of the craft. The relation between the human being and nature in this case is immediate through the choice of materials, and prior to complete transformation comes, even in the pre-industrial state, from an industrial schema, namely that of, sorry, I wrote this a bit jumbled. Yeah, the choice of materials is antecedent in general, not in the case of the tin plates, to industrial transformation. So there isn't this kind of antecedent stage of the industrial schema, namely in the case, but it is there in the case of metallurgy, which is industrial through the transformation of the mineral into metal. In the industrial production, the source of energy is no longer the same as that of information. It's split. The tool which was handheld, the energy or the entry of energy and the entry of information are superimposed in the case of the crafts. For example, in the case of glassmaking, the artisan furnishes the energy that dilates the initial bubble by blowing. And insofar as he regulates through the rhythm of his blowing the speed of the plastic deformation of the glass. But it becomes industrial when the energy is borrowed from a compressor. So there's a kind of splitting of energy and information. In this case, the information is no longer unique, and he says in his text, unfortunately. So it's kind of interesting when he says, unfortunately, that perhaps this collaboration with Panasonic of making these individually crafted encasings of the speakers would be one way of preserving information, the unique information that is added, the uniqueness of each of these objects and the kind of industrial process, but it's something probably still quite abstract in Simonon's schema. So bringing into play considerable zones of knowledge and the gathering of a large number of human beings in the industrial process. Also at the level of construction and maintenance of the machines and in the learning to operate the machines, so that the whole nodus of relation between energy and information is pulverized over a plurality of people and processes and types of specializations of area of knowledge that become fragmented. So machine and technical schemas of the relation between nature and the human, of the relation between information and energy, here in the industrial process become dissociated. They're no longer organically linked. The only place where they're organically linked is when the inventor is also the person who constructs and operates a machine. But then in that case, you can't really speak about standardization and mass production. So in a way, the kind of rift between the crafts and industrial production is this, the notion of totality in the crafts and its fragmentation in the industrial process. In the entry of information becomes more complicated, divided, specialized, and as a result, the human being is isolated not only from nature, but also from himself, and becomes enclosed in piecemeal tasks. Even the inventor is. However, trying to return to artisanal modes of production, Simondon says, is an illusion. The needs of contemporary society require not only large quantities of products and manufactured objects, but also states that cannot be obtained by means of the human body or the tool. For example, in the case of mining, when you have actual miners in the mine, but you also have an ensemble, a technological ensemble that cannot be replaced by the strength of a human individual. So this is because the temperatures, the pressures, the required physical reactions, the scale of the conditions do not match those of the human scale. So if you like, in the contemporary context, you could ask yourself whether what Simondon is proposing is some form of accelerationism. Because if you can't go back to the crafts, what he says is that you can only overcome the antithesis between the artisanal and the industrial by deepening the characteristics of the industrial, pushing to extreme limits this specialized fragmentation of human information and making it congruent or resonant with its affective modality. And I don't know if this sounds too abstract, but I think this is the direction that also this in the other text, this idea was going that you would have a kind of homogeneity between the human and the technological object. So rather than retropedaling away from industrial production, what you need is to deepen this process of industrial standardization. Push it to its extreme limits until you come to a point where this fragmentation of human information once more joins up, becomes resonant with the affective modality of the technical mentality. So how much time do I have left?
As for now, we have 4 or 5 minutes, something like that.
Okay, I'll see if I can maybe cut this a bit short.
10 minutes at most. If we,
yeah, I don't want to make it too long because I'd rather actually get the introductions.
Yes, time for questions and introductions. From what would we start? From questions, I suppose, and then introductions.
Yeah, I think that's better. We'll do a bit like 10 minutes questions and then introductions, and we'll close with a couple of words on the essay.
Okay, great.
So in the sense that what we said sounded like a kind of dystopia, Simondon also wants to distance himself from what he calls the technocratic attitude, because the technocratic attitude cannot be universalized. He says, and I quote, "The technocratic attitude cannot be universalized because it consists in reinventing the world like a neutral field for the penetration of machines." So what he has in mind is something like the Eiffel Tower or the Garabit Viaduct or bridges, that where you have a kind of integration of the industrial and nature as an aspect of a kind of virtual network around sources of energy and around sources of primary resources. So he gives the example of the Eiffel Tower, which now carries aerials, and these aerials connect to pylon masts stationed all over Europe. So the Eiffel Tower becomes this kind of singular point of connection in a reticulation or in a network, integrated in a multifunctional network as a key point of geographical and the human world, reliant on industrial standardization of elements that enable the creation of networks. The relay points of the Hertzian cables, for example, rejoin with the high sites of ancient sacredness above the valleys and the seas. So these kind of key moments of an industrial network start to coincide and have a kind of affective or affect value for human development as well. This is where they start to, where the distance between them starts to shrink. And it's in a way, in more than one way, a way in which industrial development, rather than going away from nature in the way that we tend to think about it now, especially in the climate crisis, would be something that goes towards a greater concretization with natural processes. Concretization, again, in this sense of something that's not abstract, one thing next to the other, but where things become synergetic, plurifunctional, self-regulating. So the technical mentality completes itself by rejoining nature. It's a thought network, and it's a material and conceptual synthesis. So or if you like, is a synthesis of the material and the conceptual. A synthesis in a network whose force is available in each of its points of the reticulation of the network. So the information network, for example, unites both energy and information, which were separated in the industrial phase. The assemblages and the substructures of the industrial gigantism of the Industrial Revolution return in the information technology, but in a more manageable way, in a lighter form. Electronics and telecommunications use reduced tonnages, moderate energies, and dimensions that are not crushing. So in a way, you have this process, you push further and deeper the process of industrialization, and this gigantism, or if you like, the age of the industrial dinosaurs, starts to then develop towards something that comes back to the human scale. The factory rediscovers something of the workplace when it is transformed into a laboratory. So not for individual users as in the artisanal mode, but for collective and individuals made to measure assemblages. The fabrication of separate pieces remains industrial. At the same time, the distance between the inventor, the constructor, and the operator starts to reduce itself increasingly. So energy and information, the modulation of one information, the modulation and one information. Oh, sorry, what did I write here? He gives the example of the digital clock, which brings together information and energy again, which had kind of separated in the transition from the artisanal to the industrial. I think I'm going to skip. It's a really interesting development on what he thinks about cars, because there's one aspect in which human values are artificial, if you like, and it's kind of hilarious because he looks at it from the point of view of this integration and greater resonance between natural processes and technicity. And in this process, which in a way makes us less alienated from technology, what he thinks is artificial are sociocultural variables that are nothing to do with the internal development of technicity. So tastes, you could say from today's point of view that the car industry has to play to the tastes of people who want to have gas-guzzling four-wheel drive cars, when actually technically you would be able to make cars that we are increasingly able to make cars that are much more fully integrated with our energy system and our needs. So these kind of extrinsic factors of taste and consumerism is something that he really resents. It's impure, and he considers that to be artificial in terms of the technicity, which if you push this technicity deep enough through a deepening of the industrial process, you actually come to a kind of closing of the gap of technicity and human and natural realities.
Oh,
So
I'm sorry to interrupt. I suppose we have.
I think that's a good place to end, actually. There's the large development on electronic tubes, which I'm really glad not to have to come back to here. It's interesting, but it's a bit complicated, and also A little bit tedious, I think. A bit.
Okay, so shall we make a transition to the questions and answers, so to say?
Yes, I think we should do that.
Okay. So who has questions? Okay,
Elise has her hands up. Elise, by the way, is my colleague of mine from the Collège International de Philosophie, and herself a specialist of Simondon and Stiegler's work, I think.
Not exactly, but
Not exactly. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to kind of presume, but I'm really happy you're here. I hope that we can kind of rope you in also to participate in the seminars, maybe in the next season of the seminars.
yeah, I would like to ask if you know Yukui and the question of China and his concept of cosmotechnic. And I think that it's exactly the same issue of your seminar. So it's the first point, and the second point is to talk about Simondon. I think that you can think about this little moment in le mode d'existence des objets techniques that you have translated with John Rogov, and you mentioned it, and there is a human trace, a human in the technical object, but it's not human. It's more than human. It's life itself, and you can have this life in this technical object, and I think that it's linked to his first thesis on the individuation, and it's why I think that Simondon is not only limited in general organology, but it's more than general organology, because general organology makes a distinction between organism and inorganism, and I think that Simondon is questioning this difference in this passage, and I think that we can think Technē beyond monoculture with this link between life and technology. And if we go back to life, there is a diversity of life, and technique is always connected to this diversity of life, which is not capitalism. So question and remarks, maybe. Thank you for your seminar.
Thank you. This is a fantastic first comment and question, and I would like actually to respond to the relation with life. But first, I thought it would be really amazing. I mean, I do work with Yuk also on something else, and we're having a kind of upcoming publication with Angelaki on human and artificial intelligence. But I think you have worked with him a lot. It would be lovely if you say a couple of words of where you see the relation between the question of technology in China and the aim of this seminar, which I think would be great also for the other participants.
I think that Yukui, do you know this book? Yeah, and I think that Yukui tried to think cosmotechnic on the fund of life and local life, and I think that Yukui tries to go beyond monoculture, which is linked to capitalism, coming back to the life and to the relationships between life and the environment, but the local environment. And I think that I don't understand yet this book very very good. I think that I can read it again and write on it, because it's when I write on a paper or a book that I understand really. But it's the problem is how to think technique without or in a disjunction with modernity, and how can we think the specificity of techniques in each culture. Yeah, I think that it's something like that.
I think this is a really fascinating point, because for me, it comes back to the ambivalence, and I just as a kind of proviso, I like very much the thought of Nicolas Foucault's the unity of contradictory aspects. What does he call it? The coincidentia oppositorum. The fact that if it's contradictory, it's not a problem necessarily for me, but there is an ambivalence between, on the one hand, the retropedaling or the conservative aspect of preserving what is special to the sphere of influence of one cultural area, which itself has kind of gradients and differences between itself, and the contact between these areas, and what Simondon would call this tendency towards universalization. Now, universalization, he talks about the homogeneity of technicity and the human, which is itself a really audacious hypothesis to propose today, when this is precisely what is our dystopia. But I think there's something interesting going on, and this moving in two different directions. And for lack of a better example, I think this collaboration that Panasonic had it's at least an attempt to say, what happens if you do this? I mean, at the moment, it just means that you make really beautiful objects for a very few people who can afford it. But that doesn't mean that if a lot of people try to do it, this doesn't develop into something really quirky and interesting, like technologies that people can adapt as labs in the home, for example, or I don't know, with the trend towards backyard agriculture, you could have technologies that become really suited to idiosyncratic adaptations. But there does seem to be a force pulling into two different directions. So that's one of my questions, especially given the fact that we have a planetary condition where, looking at these differences, I have actually a few problems with this, because even the idea that there is a homogeneity within one area of cultural sphere of influence is something that could be contested by subgroups of that area of influence. It might feel that they have themselves a further cultural specification that has been subsumed and obliterated by this area of influence. It's a complicated thing, but I think it's a really important conversation to have. And personally, for me, the fact that there is a contradiction is not necessarily is obviously a problem for philosophy, because it's hard to be coherent and acknowledge or work with inconsistencies or paradoxes, if you like. But I think it's a productive way of going about it, which brings me to the second point about the question of life. If the science of life, or what we really know about life, resumes itself to processes that we can only understand by the analogy with machines, namely processes. We look at, I don't know, molecular biology and neurocognitive processes. And when you grain them down in terms of resolution, you arrive at mechanisms for which the concept of life is the least easy to explain. So you can't, the life sciences in a way talk about mechanisms and not really about life. I think Jacques Monod said something like, life is like the woman that you want to take home but not be seen with in public. So one feeling that I have, and I haven't really worked on this yet, but it'd be nice to have a conversation about this. And it links up with Simondon's idea of, rather than retropedaling from the technicity of industrial standardization, is to go all the way into it, all the way deep into increasing resonance and concretization of technicity until the technological or the technical reality becomes concrete in a way that is as close as possible to what we call life, which itself we only understand in terms of mechanisms, but mechanisms that are unfathomably more concrete, less abstract than the mechanisms that we invent and make. I'm not saying that life doesn't exist, obviously. I'm just saying that we do have a problem in terms of knowledge to account for that. And perhaps the knowledge that we have of biology and the knowledge that we have of technological objects or the technicity of the realities we create has a path of convergence through this idea of concretization. So not of becoming the same. I think Simondon also says somewhere that technology can't really catch up with millions of years of evolution. It will not become as concretized, but certainly it's intermeshed already at this stage of the kind of anthropocenic impact that we have on nature. Hope that wasn't too long. Does anyone else have a kind of comment? Do you want to actually, Elise, do you want to come back to this? And
oh yeah, because I was thinking about Bergson's and Bergson's life theory, and it's very different because for Bergson, life products techniques, and life is not reducible to mechanisms. And I think that the reduction of life to mechanisms is just a part of the philosophy of technology. And I think that Simondon is not in, it's more complicated because in one hand, he says, okay, you can just think about an analogy between human or living and technical object. But in other hand, he tries to think the link between life and techniques, and it's not a life which is reducible to
no,
mechanisms.
you're completely right. And in that
Yeah.
respect, he is really the student of Georges Canguilhem.
Yeah.
So I should probably specify that this problem of the knowledge of what we call biological processes problem is something that is a question that I ask myself. I wasn't speaking for Simondon, I was really speaking for myself. The fact that what we can say in terms of scientifically defendable hypotheses about processes of life, at the finer granulation, we can only talk about it in terms, at the moment we can only talk about it in terms of mechanisms. I'm not at all saying that life is mechanistic. I'm just saying that we do have this problem of not being able to account for the things that we cannot explain as mechanisms.
Okay.
And just in that respect, in terms of cognitive schemas, for me, rather than for Simondon, there is one theoretical development where these two types of knowledges can become less abstract, more concrete, and in that the gap between them can narrow, I guess, rather than close.
Okay, thank you.
No, thank you, Elise, and thanks for being here. I'm really thrilled.
I suppose we have time for 2 at most questions left, and then we should make a transition to the introductions. So, Raphael, you'll be the first, I suppose.
Yes, in fact, I had 2 questions, but I'll just select one of them. In the first text, at some point, he talks about being not only the operator, but the operated a little bit. But the question I have is, wasn't it always the case all the time that we are made by the object we make also, and that it's, I mean, I know a little bit about André Leroy-Gourand, for example, that speaks about this in length. And so I wonder how different he means it from like the usual also theories of technique feeding back on the user or something like that.
I think the difference is probably the deliberate application of Technē to a kind of human science, which is, you know, a conversation to be had now, I think would be fascinating and extremely provocative now. So unless you think of it in terms, this idea of a metrics is exactly what is our dystopia now. There is another way to think it for sure. And I think someone like Benjamin Bratton is potentially opening up an avenue of thinking like this, and also in his Antiquitaire program, to which I'm really excited and a bit daunted to contribute. I thought exactly about the point that you made when looking at the history of mining and the kind of socio-political, economical transformations linked to mining, which ultimately, what does it mean? Is that you have these little naked worms that we are on the crust of a boiling hot planet, extracting things from the earth and transforming what humanity can be. It's a pretty awesome story. Awful and awesome because it's linked with war, with oppression, with slave trades. It's with everything we can do and everything we have done wrong too. So yeah, I totally agree with you that there has never been technical development without us being the object of it too. But I think the transition, the difference is probably the deliberate combination of cognitive schemas and operational schemas. This kind of technical mentality, the kind of anticipation in thought in your cognitive schema of thresholds of transformation that will then enable a technological schema that abstractly wouldn't make sense. So I think it's a question of awareness, but to be discussed. I mean, I don't hold a monopoly on interpreting that.
Okay, so
Sorry?
Lane, have you got a question?
I think one thing I found interesting about this being object of technology is that, at least like for transgender people, I think it's not that negative connotation, but it's kind of an ideal in a way to be the object of technology. So that's just on a side note. But what I was
It's not a side note. I think it's a really fundamental note, actually. It's a conversation I would really like to have. And I guess I brought in Haraway and xenofeminism, but this is definitely one of the aspects that is, and he talks about surgery to a certain extent, but that's not all that this is about. So yeah, really fascinating that you bring that up.
Yeah, but I think at the same time, I'm not that much into xenofeminism or accelerationism, because I think that's kind of naive in a way. And that's exactly why my question would be, is that you've talked a lot about the problem of alienation and how for Simondon technology might bring less alienation. And I found it interesting that if you go to the early writings of Marx, he's basically making the same description. It's not the question of technology itself, that technology itself is inherently alienating, but it's our use of technology and that it is integrated in the circle of capitalization, which is the same thing we have then in Frankfurt School for the cultural industry, which is the capitalization of knowledge, more or less. So I would be interested to, if you could get a little bit more into detail on this relation, because I think in both theory schools, you could say capitalization of technology, of knowledge is the problem, and not technology or knowledge itself as a self-circulating feedback in a way.
One of the thoughts I had about this, I mean, just to start with, perhaps this idea, when I thought of accelerationism, I thought more of this idea that really, he's got so many super counterintuitive turns in this text on progress, where you kind of go like, ooh, what is happening here? The idea that in order for industrial development to be less alienating, you don't have to retro-pedal or slow it down, but you have to go deeper into it, all the way deeper into it, until you arrive through concretization at the information, at the kind of digital revolution that we have now. I think he wasn't talking about that at the time, obviously, but at least he was talking about information technologies already as something that had moved on from the gigantism of 19th century industrialism, which continues, obviously, because you have no information technology without mines and quarries and so forth. So this idea of going deeper into it, I think is a fascinating development. The other thing I was thinking in terms of capitalism is he talks at some point about the hypertrophy of automatisms as something that is like a symptom of the aging or saturation of a phase. And automatism is what he finds least interesting. And in that example, he wasn't even talking about technical objects or technical ensembles. He was talking about this first phase of the sophistication, the progressive saturation of our understanding of language, with linguistics, with grammar, with logic. And I presume underneath this is also the idea that scholastic philosophy at some point kind of petered out because it became sterile, because it had this kind of super saturated system of language. And I wonder whether, to a certain extent, if economics, like what was her name again? The history of mining and the origin of capitalism in the Middle Ages, which I think is quite an audacious and important hypothesis to bring into the conversation. What's her name again? Sorry.
Jeanette Collot.
Yeah, thanks. So, if you think of economic theory as a cognitive schema that is fundamentally a technical schema, and something that has itself evolved in a way that is not universal because it does not integrate with the other spheres. So it has integrated with language, for example, in the way that predictive language technologies have fully integrated with capitalism in kind of a platform capitalism and in social media, but it hasn't integrated with our with this phase of religion, which would have kind of matured into a form of ethics that overlaps with the other phases. So in that respect, perhaps economics is a technological schema, cognitive and practical technological schema that remains abstract on several levels, both because it's not, it hasn't bridged in a way that universalizes with the other phases of human development, the ones that Simondon mentions, but also because it is based on classical economics, which didn't have a concept of the finite world the way that we are confronted with it now. So the Dasgupta review, for example, brings into focus how a technical schema like economics could become less abstract and more concrete if it integrates with our understanding of our nature and natural resources. I don't know, that's one of my answers. I don't know if, yeah, perhaps capitalism is a form of hypertrophy of automatisms and a form of abstraction because it doesn't integrate fully with the other phases, or it kind of lacks universality in that sense. Let's see what Noah was talking about it. I don't know, it's just a kind of thoughts that came to me while reading this text. So I don't know what you guys think about this.
So I suppose we shall now move to the introductions at last.
How much time do we have for the introductions?
About 15 minutes, 16.
So, and we're 20 people, so I'm afraid you're gonna, I'm okay. If Mrs. Love, if you have like 5-10 minutes more, we can be a little bit, I'm not in a super hurry, but yeah, so everyone it's gonna be introduce themselves, maybe a little bit briefly. So we'll take a little bit of time next time again, that perhaps when you ask a question or comment, it would be nice if you also introduce yourself at the same time. Then we can catch up
So
in depth.
should I call out for each name?
Yeah, I
or-
think that would be really helpful.
Okay, so we'll begin with Aglaya.
Oh, hi, nice to meet you. To be very quick, I'm art historian and curator, and I'm involved in art and curatorship, curating practices, and I'm kind of very lost at the moment personally. So I guess my issues for now is identity, constructing identity or better identities, and positioning, like positioning of oneself. It's gonna be very short. Thank you.
Thank you. And nice to meet you.
And we will continue with Anna.
But hi everyone. I'm gonna try to turn this on. Okay, ain't got a camera. So I'm Ana, I'm from Rio de Janeiro, and I'm from the Art and Curatorial Practice program. I'm trying to put up something like pollination as a methodology for aesthetical practices, as a kind of technology thinking from Donna Haraway and also from Simondon. So, okay, I'm just gonna stay here for today.
Yeah, thank you. And nice to see you again without seeing you, without the camera.
Benito. Benito. Are you with us?
Maybe his mic doesn't work.
So then
Off, actually.
Dagmar.
Benito, your mic is off in case you were trying to say something.
Okay, let's keep so Dagmar Kessler.
Hi, I'm also on the art and curatorial program. I'm a visual artist, and I have a background also in design from before, and I work with sculpture and installation and worked with craft also a lot previously, and yeah, kind of multimedia also with electronic medias and media and interaction and motorized objects. Yeah.
Okay, then Elise, I suppose.
So I am Elise, and I am a philosopher, and I worked at the Collège International de Philosophie with Cécile, and now I am a postdoctoral student researcher in Slovakia, and I am working on this question, technical life, and I am working on the link between life and technology. That's why I'm here. Thank you.
Thank you. Then Fernando.
Hello, I'm Fernando. I'm from Brazil. I am in the transdisciplinary studies program. I just got a BA in psychology, waiting to be a psychotherapist. And I'm working in some links in adventure, in literature, with the works of Giorgio Agamben and Michel Foucault.
Thank you, Freya.
Hi, I'm Freya. I'm from Germany. I'm in the critical philosophy program, and I am generally very interested in the work of Simondon. I've met Cécile and also Jim before in the conference that was held in Hildesheim and in Paris.
Amazing! I remember now. Yeah, I saw Freya, and but I couldn't remember your last name. So nice that you joined us.
Yeah, I'm really happy, and
you gave an amazing presentation there.
Thank you. Also, I really enjoyed your talk today. Of course, I know Daniela very well because she's been my lecturer in my bachelor's and my master's. And I'm also generally very interested in the question of, or like an intersection of ecology and cybernetics, and also the question of technical objects as agents, as ecological agents, and therefore also, I think the question, or one question that will occupy me throughout the seminars, kind of going into a similar direction of what Raphael asked about how technical objects actually also influence us, and how this can be interlinked with this idea of concretization of technical objects. And I think I'll leave it there for now.
Okay, thank you. Then Gregory.
Hi, everybody. My name is Gregory Van Wagner, and I teach philosophy at North Idaho College on the west coast of the US. And I'm very interested in Simondon. I haven't read him. I picked up his book at the beginning of the summer, and then the summer got crazy. So I'm excited to read him. Anyway, that's me.
Even without Simondon, because Simondon is pretty crazy as well. Anyway, it's so nice to see you again, Gregory.
Yeah, it's great to be here, man.
And apologies for the feedback for your amazing essay. I'm sending those. I've got all the feedback together and just sending it.
Oh, you're talking to me?
Yeah, you and everyone who was in the
Everybody.
Great refusal seminar and waiting for the feedback. So I'll send that on Monday.
Cool.
Thank you. Then Ioannis.
Hi, everyone. Hi, I'm Yannis. I'm an art historian, a writer, and a translator, currently based in Greece. For this seminar, because it has ignited like many thoughts, which I'd love to share, like perhaps in the next seminars. But I've researched the work of forensic architecture as part of my master's in Edinburgh. And the last couple of years, I've been researching translation and the notion of the archive in art, experimental writing, and lately sound. I really just quickly would like to say that I was truly excited about the connections between, the life of things. So I also thought of Arjuna Pandurai, so the social life of things and objects, and also about the biopolitics, perhaps, of objects. So like the idea of a usuological turn, maybe.
So you said the social life of objects by who?
Arjuna Pandurai, the anthropologist. Yeah, so I don't know.
There's recently come a book out of the social life of objects by sorry, her name is going to come back to me in a second, which is really weird because I admire her work so much. Do you mind putting the name of the author you just mentioned in the chat?
Of course, yeah.
Monique David Ménard wrote an amazing book on the social life of objects as well. So I'll put that in there.
That's so interesting. I'd love to see if there are connections, like, or overlappings, but I was thinking about the social relations that underpin the object, and then the process of valorization, of accumulation, perhaps, and also of devaluation. So maybe those are questions that we will discuss, but just this is the name.
Yeah, thanks.
Shall we proceed?
Yeah, please.
Okay, then Joel.
Hi, everyone. I'm Joel. I'm a philosophy student from Washington State. Most of my background is in pragmatism and philosophy of science, though I've been working on something with religion and technology through Levi-Strauss and Max Weber, and I'm excited to see how I can bridge that with more French theory that I'm just getting introduced to with Simondon and Stigler.
Amazing, thanks.
Okay, thanks. Then Juan, if I'm correct.
Hello, everyone. My name is Juan Toro from Colombia, Latin America. I am a painter artist and study a few semesters of philosophy at the University of Vienna and then in Spain. I study in Spain aspects of philosophical materialism. It's the one very traditional or philosophical way. Some materialist terminology within the philosophy of art, and now I want to confront aspects that we call here as neurocentrism, epistemological, nociological, hyperrealism, etc. Into the new center terminology, I like so much as I see, I take the new center as artistic, not only aesthetic, but artistic and philosophical part or dynamics of art. Yes, at the moment I work with one group, collective, with interest, have interest in the notion of group, collectivity. Hello, yes, it's all. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Katarina.
Yes, hi everyone. My name is Katerina. I'm from Ukraine, and I'm a researcher and art historian. So my current research is based on the personal photo archive of my grandfather, who was a photographer on one of the Soviet factories. But I'm also working with another factory's archives to study modes of documentary in Soviet photojournalism, and especially to study cultural production within industrial archaeology. So I'm kind of concentrating on how all these factories, they were producing a huge mass of cultural production alongside the machinery. That is correlates with the Simon Don's idea of technical culture. So I'm very excited about this seminar. Thank you.
Thank you.
So Lane is the next.
Hi, I'm some kind of noise musician or something, and currently studying computer music, with like my main topic being time and rhythm. So I think that's basically it.
Thank you, Lucia.
Yes.
Hello, everybody. I'm Lucia. I'm currently living in Mexico City. I'm an architect, but I'm now working more in the artistic file. I'm working in, well, professionally and academically, working in research of biological systems and exploration with materials and how that relates with social systems and like generating structures. That's like the relation I have with architecture now. And the other aspect of this exploration is the analog exploration with the digital exploration and how each one of them inform each other. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Then Luia.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Luia. I'm a curator and teaching and research assistant at the Department of Art Theory in Zagreb. I in my work, I'm currently also in process of applying for a PhD. So I'm interested in kind of a speculative artistic practices that employ this notion of alien, technological, or hybrid, non-human kind of subjects or becomings, which are very much in line with also the kind of discourse of philosophical materialism and realism, which kind of also ties into this notion of technological progress as kind of a field which explores kind of alternatives in regards to alternative futures and a specific kind of relation to art practice. Yeah, so that's it.
Thank you, Luca. Luca.
Hey everyone, my name is Luca. I'm a performance artist. I'm enrolled in art and curatorial practice. And Luia right now really nicely explained also part of my interest. And I was also super excited for this seminar, and I'm happy to be a part of it. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Then Maria Sobral or Sobral.
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm Maria. I'm from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, and it's my 30th year studying philosophy at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro here. I'm not exactly a certified student at New Century yet. I'm just on the seminar. I tried to apply it, but I gave my intentions after the deadline, okay? And I decided to apply it because I decided to apply it. Okay, I decided to apply it because I got good recommendations about other courses you, Malaspina, teach, and because I like your approach and the intersections between noise and information theory, the information entropy you talk about. I heard about that in a course on social dissonance, the Martin's book, which explores the types of alienation, the mental state of noise, the conditions that the mental state of noise could achieve, etc. But I certainly didn't explore the idea very well yet. At the moment, I am still in the process of developing my scientific initiation project, which is built mainly in the light of a Deleuze-Guattarian metaphysical conceptual origin, and with a perspectivistic outer anthropological approach, perhaps with a bit of speculative fabulation by Donna Haraway's, to think in terms of a becoming and indigenous relational practices, more specifically to investigate how the Yanomami, which is a group of indigenous people who also live in the Amazon rainforest here in Brazil, how the Yanomami multi-naturalistic, ecosophical, ontological point of view is engendered mainly by the shamanic narratives and myths that make use of the metamorphosis between humans and non-humans. Okay, but among that, I would say that because of my tutoring experience in a post-Cajun aesthetics course at my university last year here in Rio de Janeiro, my other interests in philosophy also circulate in a more properly aesthetic sense, and the possibilities of the use of indeterminacy and aesthetic experience and investigation into the ontology of the work of art, etc., things like that. I think that is.
Thank you, Maria. Maria Jesus.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Maria Jesus. I'm from Peru. It's so nice to see a lot of Latin American fellows. So I'm very happy for that. And I'm a musical composer. I'm also a researcher. I'm enrolled in the art and cultural practice program. And I think I'm trying to get closer to curatorship, moved by necessity, other than other stuff. And my interests lie specifically in this context are more inclined to question the role of progress in the conception of technology, and that is motivated firstly because of how various specifically popular and traditional relationships with technology in arts, specifically music, are deemed as stationary or not in synchronicity, or at least in the same time as the ones that are deemed as progressive or experimental. I am very intrigued by what experimentalism really entails in such contexts. And so I try to research and question a lot of these assumptions based well, my practices and investigations with other fellow artists and thinkers that are trying to work through this complicated relationship with technology, with our own technologies, and well, this whole enterprise of cosmotechnics. So yeah.
Thank you very much. Then
See you again,
Noah.
Maria.
Yeah, really nice to see you too, Cécile.
Noah.
Hey everyone, I'm Noah. I'm based in Buffalo. I'm a filmmaker and a writer, and have a little bit of a background in like English literature. I'm really just taking this because these kinds of writings are fun. So I'm just here to have a little bit of fun. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Thank you, Panayotis.
Hi, I'm Panayotis. I'm from Athens, Greece. I'm an artist, architect, and tattooer. I mostly work with collectives. We do collective art, collaborative art practices. And I'm glad I'm here. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Patrick.
Hello, everybody. I'm coming to you from Pennsylvania. I'm a musician and been reading a bunch of different stuff. I mean, I took Cécile's resonance course, which was incredible. And so a lot of reading sort of stemming from that. And then kind of branched out into trying to find like any trace of sound theories in Deleuze and things like that.
Nice to see you again here.
Yeah, you too. I'm doing the certificate program, so thank you.
Okay, and finally, Raphael.
Yeah, hello. So I'm Raphael. I'm from West Switzerland, around Geneva, but I'm based in Zurich. I'm a composer. I studied musicology and philosophy before, and now I started new studies in classical singing in the Hochschule in Basel. And yeah, so I mean, I think I've already said some stuff last time, but maybe I'll do something on the topic of the seminar. But I'm quite interested in what I read today about, for example, handwork and industrial work, and how it could relate also to what I do. And what I see is, for example, in my practice as a composer, I work very conceptually. I work also with different types of media, normally not so common in new music, or I mean, the new music world I'm into. So I would say it's a very, like the energies and the informations are extremely separated. And on the other hand, I mean, in this case of singing, I don't know exactly what I'm doing with this, if I'm going to really become like a performer or something, or if I just do that also for this experience of concentrating energy, information, instrument creation, self-reflection on many different types of feelings that you have when you practice this kind of stuff. So, I mean, I'm really, I think, at the right spot to try to get a little bit of concepts that would help me also navigate a bit what I think, or what I will come to think about this in the future. So yeah, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Then we have Sam, and we're wrapping up.
Hey, thank you. Yeah, sorry, I realized I was a spectator and not a panelist, but I am in the class. My name is Sam. I'm in Brooklyn. I am a product manager at a software company in the education space. I got my bachelor's in science and technology studies, where I read some Bruno Latour. This feels like going a little deeper, which is awesome. Just interested in what technology can be, what software experiences could be. So really looking forward to this class. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, me too. Thanks everyone for the introductions. We haven't left anyone out, no? Say your word now if you haven't introduced yourself. It's really late. I don't want to keep you any longer, or Mrs. Love, so I'll say 3 words about the essay and then we'll talk about it again next time, but you know, maybe everybody won't be necessarily there. Essays are limited to 3,000 words. I will, from my experience of the last few seminars, I saw that everyone comes from very different backgrounds, so that I don't like the idea of grading anyway. Unless I get something that is like 3 bullet points or no effort at all, I would kind of normally just say the work is kind of give excellent as a grade, and the real feedback is the comment. And the comment, what I want to say about apprehension of writing in the context of theory and philosophy is that it's extremely difficult and it never gets easy. And for some people it's easy perhaps, but I don't know anyone like that. Raise your hand if you think it's easy. I don't know. Anyway, it's extremely difficult, and there are just a few things that I want you to think about. I understand that you come from different backgrounds. I'm not interested in pointing out mistakes, or this is badly written, or writing critiques that will give you sleepless nights. I'm interested in picking up on a dynamic and helping you to amplify it if I can, obviously. Second, something that is totally underestimated when we get nervous about writing is references. So whichever style of writing you undertake, some people write like academic type essays, other people have a kind of more introspective diary type writing or experimental performative writing. Everything is fine, provided that it's not sloppy, but that you kind of think about what you're doing with the writing as a medium. And whatever you do, your references need to be formatted in a way that you choose what format you use and you apply this. It's a bit like filing your nails. It's really boring, but strangely enough, it's a form of courtesy that enables you to really show gratitude for the sources that you use. And it has a strange formatting feedback on thought as well. So that's just the one thing. 3,000 word limits, clean formatted references, like really taking care of the references that you use, and for the rest I will give feedback that is constructive and that tries to understand what you're trying to do with the text, rather than kind of foisting on you a format of writing that may be right for some people and not in other practices or contexts. Yeah, so thanks so much everyone for staying a bit later. And Mrs. Love, thank you so much. This is fantastic moderation, and thanks for helping me with the timekeeping, because I have like an appalling sense of time.
Thanks
really
for the session.
Nice to meet you, everyone.
Yes, see you next time.
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you
all. See you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.